This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Welcome back, everyone. We are going to be looking at some viewer work today. Before we get into this, though, I realized that we have been doing these videos for a long time. There's actually a lot of people who are newer subscribers that are here, and I want to take a second and just talk about people sending stuff in. So I've been doing this channel for 15 years now, and the first couple years I did a lot of work reviews where I would look at books of well-known photographers, a lot of monographs, things like that. And I guess probably around 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, I got a book in the mail one day from a viewer, and it ended up being this guy named David Brookover, who has become a very close friend of mine ever since. I did an artist series video on him. If you haven't seen it, I'll put it up here so you can check that out. David's a fabulous photographer. And then all of a sudden it started a trend because I shared his book with everybody on the show, and other people started sending work in as well. As this started to snowball, it became kind of a thing, and I start doing these videos where I show viewer work because I figure if somebody has gone to the trouble to make something out of the spirit of creation, I think that that's worthy of recognizing and sharing it with other people in hopes to encourage you guys to do the same. Photography's not all about camera reviews and new stuff all the time. It's about actually making photographs and making books and making zines and making actual work and output that you can show and getting better as an artist. And anyway, that's what I want to go in today. So I've got some awesome stuff to share with you. So let's go ahead and get to the mail. All right, so first up, and this is very cool. This comes to us from Joao, Flecha, and Filipa Oliveira. This is actually a collaboration, and Joao and Filipa have actually sent something in before. In fact, let me grab it real quick. So some of you may remember this. This is a zine that I featured on the show probably about a year ago. It's a really cool oversized zine. And basically this is a project that these two are putting together, and they're trying to turn this into a photography magazine. So you can think of this as sort of a startup zine. This was called 1,000 Words #1. And today we've got 1,000 Words #2. And I'm going to read you the note that they shared with me here, which reads, "Dear Ted, we wrote this letter as a way to say thank you for your support and an appreciation for your work. This is the second volume of our magazine, 1,000 Words, and because of the review that you gave us in your first volume, we were contacted by many photographers from all over the world, resulting in the presence of 2 more authors in this volume. Slim Labidi, a French-Tunisian living in Paris, and Oji Starcevic, a Serbian currently living in Frankfurt, Germany. The second volume was a big step for us since we decided to go beyond the standard print. For this special number, we decided to use only black and white photography, but print them on black paper by inverting the image and having the light, which is white ink, printed on the paper." All right, a few things that I want to say about this. I don't believe that I have ever seen a project of photography that was white ink put on black paper. This is very unusual. It has a really cool look to it. It has kind of this blue tone to it and almost looks like a whole book of cyanotypes in a way. This is really unusual and very different. I really dig it. Another thing that I really like is even though this looks entirely different in terms of printing from the other zine, there's enough similarities with obviously the format, but even the style of the images that give it a really interesting feel to it, and it doesn't break the style of the publication. And this is something that's really outside the box. I mean, if you go to any magazine stand, bookstore, and you look at magazines on Newsrack, nothing is this cool. I mean, there have been a few things historically that have gotten commercial success being this cool, and I don't want to jinx this because I hope you do have some commercial success with this, but it's very unusual, and I commend you for going in a very brave direction on this. There's one thing I'm actually reminded of. You know, a lot of times when we talk about creativity, and there have been a lot of people who've written books on creativity and kind of analyzed it and taken it as the science and what the approach is like. And one of the things you hear people talk about a lot is a lot of times the materials and how they affect the process. And so, for example, if you're a painter and you're learning how to paint, chances are you're going to go get a stretch canvas and you're going to start doing a work on some kind of rectangle or square, and you're going to use paint that's pretty standard. And so therefore you've already limited your creativity just in the materials that you do. I think photography is very much the same. You're either shooting digital or you're shooting film, but it's still a rectangular format. And so a lot of times just the base materials that you're using are going to limit some of that creativity. But I think this is an example of something that breaks that wide open. It's just an inverse process of printing. It's something I've never seen before. I can't think of one instance where I've seen this, and it's really cool. So Joao, thank you for sending this, and I hope you guys have a lot of success with this. The other thing that I love about this is it reminds me a lot of what I really loved about the early days of the internet, back when, there were less people on it, and there was an enormous range of communities of people who would just come together because of a mutual interest. It wasn't about making money. It wasn't about commerce. And there was kind of that innocence of just all of a sudden, I remember very specifically, it's like I'm emailing with somebody who's on the other side of the world that I met because we're both interested in the same thing. And as somebody who was born and grew up with no internet, I mean, this was really mind-blowing at the time. And I think a lot of us didn't take that for granted early on. I mean, it was really amazing. And so just the whole nature of this project coming together after I reviewed the first book, and you found 2 new photographers for this, and this is just really cool. It is all about the collaboration. So, man, you guys ought to be really proud of this and keep it going. I hope to see more. All right, tough act to follow, but actually it's very interesting because I've got 3 groups of zine projects that I want to share with you next, and this just is a coincidence. I don't ever plan these. I mean, we've got a big stack of mail in the other room. I pull out what I've got, we start to go through them, but each one of these 3 projects, I think sequencing is the major component that ties all of these together. Something I talk about a lot on this show. And I'll show you what I mean as we get into this. So I've got 2 zines that I have here that come to us from Mark Ponsford, and a postcard which reads, "Hi Ted, a couple more zines for you from England with best wishes, Mark." So both of these zines are really cool. Now they're all black and white, and Mark has a really grainy, kind of gritty style to what he does that I actually really like. Has kind of a grunginess that's definitely not polished, even though both these zines are produced in that way. But what I want to talk about on here when I mention sequencing is when you see images on opposing pages. And I think this is something that it's a skill that is very difficult for a lot of photographers because we tend to work shot to shot. In other words, we either envision something or we find something and we work just from one photograph to the next. But what is interesting is when you get into publications like this, the real work obviously comes in when you realize there's a language with these images and how they speak to one another. So, you know, if you have 2 images on facing pages, for instance, they're not just arbitrary. One has to speak to the other. And I think this is something that Mark does really well. And a lot of times, you know, they're very limited in this case because they're all black and white. So we're not working with color, but we're working with language of geometry, I think, to some extent. Also the use of subject matter that he's got. And I think there's a real flow that goes on. And this kind of dialogue does exist between images on opposing pages, but also as you turn pages and as you go through these. I also like the limitations that Mark has put on these. For instance, drop through is a vertical orientation and disappear is landscape. It features mainly full bleed images on all these. And it's really cool to see how that language changes depending on the landscape versus vertical orientations of these. So anyway, I think that's another thing that's really interesting is finding ways to be creative in the realm of limitations and rules that are set up. Anyway, these are really awesome. Mark, thanks for sharing. These are really cool. So keeping in mind this idea of sequencing and the dialogue that images have with one another, we're going to get into these next ones. I also want to say it's just really interesting to me because even the first zine today that we looked at, just in terms of limitations and how to be creative within those, this is a wide range of stuff that we got. So we've got some more zines. We're going to be dealing with color this time. But before we get into that, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Squarespace. Listen, you need a website, and we all know how much work that is to build and maintain, but it doesn't have to be. Squarespace is by far the easiest way to build your online presence. It's also the best way to grow a business that works for you without having to write a single line of code. Do you just need a simple portfolio or a blog to showcase your work? Well, Squarespace is perfect. Featuring a drag-and-drop interface, it's intuitive, it allows you to build galleries quickly and update your site with ease. Are you running a business? Well, Squarespace gives you additional tools for things like appointment scheduling, private member areas, social media tools, and even advanced email marketing. Do you sell products or services? Well, Squarespace has you covered with complete tools to power your store, from merchandising to checkout so that you can sell, ship, and build your customer base. You can even sell classes or manage appointments through your website. And with Squarespace extensions, you can easily sync with third parties to manage, optimize, and enhance your website. From social media integration to SEO, Squarespace gives you all the tools you need to grow a business that works for you. So head over to Squarespace and sign up for the free trial. Start with one of their award-winning templates and see what you can create and just how good you're going to look. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AOP and I can save you an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Just use offer code AOP on checkout. So give it a try and see if Squarespace is right for you. And I want to give a special shout out and thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. All right, so next up we have a series, and these are 4 zines in that series. These are very small square format. These come to us from David Whitmer. These are all called SE. David enclosed a letter which reads, Dear Mr. Forbes, enclosed are copies of a photozine project I've been working on lately, SEE. I put one together every month in editions of 30 and will probably stop after a year or so. So I have 2 more issues to present. As zines, you will see, are comprised... So I have more issues to present. The zines, as you will see, are comprised of smartphone images. I was a late bloomer when it came to smartphone photography, and I got my first smartphone about a year ago, in fact, and I'm still not sure what I think of having a computer in my pocket, but I do know how the technology freed me to take pictures very casually of subjects that I may not bother with my more quote-unquote serious cameras. This project thus started out as kind of a tongue-in-cheek acknowledgement of the smartphone as a real camera. Only later did I realize it was also becoming somewhat more of a serious project, documenting the changing landscape of my rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. In any case, the zine format was perfect for the project, and I really dig the way they came out. I would like to add that despite the fact that these images were taken from a smartphone, I have chosen not to upload them to the internet. I am a firm believer in resurrecting as much as possible the idea of using prints as the primary transmitter of photographic ideas. I hope that you enjoy them. Thanks and all the best, David. David, I love these. These are very cool. There's a couple comments that I want to make. First of all, we're talking about that whole idea of sequencing, and I think David has a really solid grasp on sequencing. Now, what's interesting is I love the idea of using a smartphone for things, and I love the idea that this is something, well, it's technology that we have access to, treating it in a slightly different way, not going to upload them to the internet, but the sole purpose is to make these collections. Now, what's significant about that is the way that David treats these. David has a very good understanding of kind of this geometrical dialogue that happens a lot of times between images. He also has a really solid concept of contrasts. And a lot of times you'll see in here, a lot of times it could be subject. Most of the time it's color, using complementary colors on either side. And a lot of the work that goes into this comes into, again, what I was saying earlier is that we take these images, but the real work comes in post-production when we're working on basically a layout. And so what we have here are 4 zines that really encompass that really well. And they give you, it's not just random images that we're looking at that were collected during a set period of time. They actually speak and they have a flow and they read much like you would a novel or a book. All right, so David, these are very beautifully done. I have a couple comments and a couple little criticisms on here. I really do like these. I love the format. I love the size. I love the consistency that everything is full bleed. So you've kind of gotten outside of the format that the iPhone will natively shoot in, which is a rectangular format, and these are obviously square. And so, again, I think you have a really good eye of that dialogue and that story that goes through. They very much read like a book, and they're very cool. I love the fact that you've titled these SE. Now, it's a little bit obscure, and if you know the reference to the phone, which is a small iPhone, and it's a very cool concept. Now, typically, I will admit that when people send me stuff, a lot of times people love to tell me what camera they shot on, what film types they used, and I'm going to be really honest, it really doesn't matter. The photographs are what matter, and then sometimes later, if you're curious about something, it's more interesting to go into the technical side of things. But I think it works here because it brings your attention immediately to the fact that these were done on a phone and something that's not normally thought of in the serious realm of photography. So I think that is very cool. One criticism that I have is that I wouldn't put the dates on these as much. I know this started as a journal project, but when you see the year on these and being 2017, I'm talking about these now in 2023, it feels like it's a little bit dated. I guess until they get really old, then they're nostalgic. But I think that this would be an interesting project to kind of take a look at outside the journalistic realm a little bit. When I first saw these and I realized there were 4 of them and I realized they had dates on them, I kind of thought you were going to be playing on the 4 seasons because you do see seasons change throughout here. It's kind of a classic statement to make. And then how can you make them more representative of the time of the year that they are? That way you kind of still hold that journalistic vibe to it, but then they start to make a statement outside that. Anyway, something to consider at least. Seriously, these are really inspiring. I love the style that you shoot in. It's sort of a William Eggleston vibe at times, which is really cool because he's a photographer I love. And these are just really nicely done, man. Okay, next up is this little book called One Day I Sang a Raw. This comes to us from Perry Carbonell. Perry has a note in the front that just reads, Ted, I've been a fan of your show for a while. You're doing a great job. I hope you enjoy these film photos. And then 2 hashtags, 35mm film, 120 film Perry, and there's his Instagram handle. And by the way, I will link up to everybody that I featured in this video in the show description below, so make sure you check out your colleagues and support their work. There's some really good stuff in here. Anyway, this is a really cool little book, and again, we're going to talk about sequencing in here. One thing that I want to say is typically with a layout like this, and one thing that Perry does is he goes into sets where you have 3 images on a page, and then I think in a couple cases, yeah, there's one with 4 images on one side and a 5th on the other. I typically am not a big fan of this kind of style because I think most times it's just too much information for me. However, I would make an exception on this because I think you have such a design aesthetic to this. And again, this dialogue of geometry that goes between the photos, they're not arbitrarily thrown on here. They have a dialogue between one another that which they speak and flow. And this is really well done. To be honest with you, I know that you're a very proud film shooter. And again, it has a cool look to it and a great aesthetic that's very cinematic in quality. I'm not sure that's important to the project. I want to see the images. I really don't care what they were made with as much, but, you know, small criticism there. Another thing I really like, and this is probably my favorite spread in here, you see this image on the lower left, and that caught my eye at first because I actually thought it was two different images because it has the split down the middle. So I don't know if it was intentional, but one of the things that Perry's doing in here is actually even playing with this format and this layout within the images. I think it's really cool. This is really well done. Beautiful book. You should be very proud. And I would love to know what you guys think as well, so make sure you drop a comment below. I will catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.